Hey, Mr. K here. We are talking about axles today, and more specifically rear axles. So I know I've got some pictures of CV axles in there. We're going to save that for another day. So we're just talking about rear axles today, straight axles, I should say. All right, we're going to talk about basic parts of the rear axles, maintenance, and then what typically goes wrong with them. Okay, this is a kind of a neat video simulation. Go ahead and just watch this time and watch just only part one. Okay, you should just watch that video. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea of why rear axles are a little more complicated than just two gears. So I'm going to start with the most basic part and also probably the biggest, which is the axle housing. So this holds everything together. It's got bearings, or it holds the bearings in, it holds gears, seals, that type of thing, but the housing itself, okay, just an empty housing. Axle shaft. On some vehicles, it holds the wheel on. Some vehicles, it doesn't hold the wheel on, but it just drives the wheel hub. But no matter what, it's going to look something similar to this. That is an axle shaft. Transfers energy from the center of the axle out to the wheel. How about a wheel bearing? Also called a hub bearing. Okay, this is mounted on the axle shaft typically. It's what the axle shaft rides on, which is going to be somewhere in this area near your drum brakes, if it's a drum brake equipped vehicle. And that's what the bearings typically look like. There are a few designs, but that's going to be probably the most common you guys will see is flat roller bearings. And those, of course, are the seals that keep water from getting into the bearings. Ring gear. Okay. So ring gear is just what it looks like, just a huge gear in the shape of a ring. And it's driven by this gear here, which goes to the drive shaft, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But the ring gear is this big guy, and you will hear people talk about ring gear, wear patterns, and oh, what size ring gear did you have, and that type of thing. Which brings us to the pinion gear. Pinion gear drives the ring gear. So the pinion gear, you can see it back there. That goes out the front of the axle, connects to the drive shaft, which connects to the transmission, which connects to the engine. Okay, pinion gear. Typically, you have to buy these in a set. If you're going to buy a new ring gear, you can't buy a new ring gear without buying a new pinion gear. Most of the time, they want you to buy them together because they mate together. What I mean by that is the surfaces actually wear into each other as the miles go on and on. And if you just replace one, you'll get improper wear on the other one, and it'll wear out prematurely. Carrier assembly. Some people also call it the pig. So differential carrier, or the carrier assembly, holds a lot of stuff. The ring gear bolts to it. There's gears inside of it. It's got little splines inside of each end that connect to the axle shafts. But that's the carrier assembly, or the pig. Which brings us to what's inside of the carrier, which is the differential, also called spider gears, also called side gears. Some people just call it the diff. Okay, so what size diff do you have in there? Or what kind of diff do you have? We'll talk about that another day. So inside of here are spider gears. You might ask what those are for. Spider gears allow, as you saw in the video, one wheel has to turn faster than the other when a car makes a turn, and that is what a spider gear does. These spider gears allow one wheel of the axle to spin faster than the other without a tire skidding. By the way, when the vehicle is going in a straight line, perfectly straight line, these gears don't do anything. These spider gears do absolutely nothing. So they just hang out. You're going in a straight line. If you were to drive a car in a straight line all the time, like drag racers, that type of thing, all they need is a ring and pinion. They don't need spider gears. This can just be solid steel in here. Another close-up view of spider gears inside the pig. Those bolts are for the ring gear, but the ring gear is obviously not there. How about this guy? Pinion yoke. Okay, that connects obviously to the front of the other end of the pinion gear, connects up here, and sits on the front of the rear axle and connects the pinion to the drive shaft. So here's kind of an overview. Okay, this one actually has a different style pinion yoke or pinion plate, I guess you'd call it. Looks a little different, but same idea. Okay, there's your axle shafts, there's your hub, wheel hub out there, some bearings, right? That stuff should all look familiar. All right, so how do we preserve this stuff? How do we make it last 300,000 miles? Well, our good friend Shopkey for a 99 Silverado is going to tell us every oil change. So it says change oil every 3,000 miles, and it says every other oil change, you should be inspecting the axle fluid and the axle seals. We'll talk about how to do that, but it wants you to inspect. And then if you click the little arrow there, it'll tell you, the little one in Shopkey, it'll tell you every 15,000 if you're towing or you're in dusty conditions, every 15,000 miles, you should be replacing the fluid itself. So every other oil change, inspect the fluid, and then every 15,000 miles, change it in your rear axle. When you go to change fluid in a rear axle, it's not like changing oil on an engine. Most of the time, they don't have a drain plug. If you're really lucky, they do, but I would argue that most of them don't. And you're just going to have to unbolt the whole rear differential cover, rear axle cover, and fluid spills out everywhere and it's a mess and it stinks, and welcome to the job. So that's just what you got to do. There's a fill plug or sometimes a drain plug, but most of the time the fill plug on these, you can't see in this photo. You pull it out, it may look like this. That is because, let's see, throw that stuff up there. That fill plug, a lot of them have a magnet built in and they catch stray metal inside of there so it doesn't grind in the gears. So that's normal. You want to wash that off though, get that out of there. And depending on the vehicle, they're going to tell you every 15,000 all the way up to every 60,000 miles to change the rear differential fluid. If you pull that drain plug or that fill plug out and it looks like this, I would start worrying. That's a lot of metal. That's a little bit of an abnormal amount of metal. Unless someone's never changed it, that's too much metal, and you probably need to start thinking seriously about what's going wrong inside your axle. This is just a fun video. We didn't really need it in the presentation, but it's just a fun video. It's kind of neat to see what's going on inside of differential while it's running. So go ahead and watch this at this time. At least watch maybe about a third of it so you can get to the point where he spins the axle. Okay, should have just watched that video. Now let's talk about what goes wrong. So I'm going to talk to you about the vent tube in a rear axle. First of all, think about why it's needed. Okay, there's a vent tube. As the axle runs down the road, it heats up. What happens to air as it heats up? It expands. That means it's going to build pressure inside the axle. If you build pressure, eventually the pressure's got to go somewhere. Unless the axle explodes, it has to go somewhere. It's going to leak out somewhere. If you don't put a vent on the axle, it's going to leak out through a gasket, and it's going to blow a gasket or it's going to blow a wheel seal. Not what you want. You want the air to leak out up top in a controlled environment. So there's a vent tube. Okay, vent tubes usually go up to the frame and they just kind of hang out, and the end of them is somewhere up there in the frame. So why did I put under issues? What goes wrong with vent tubes? Well, if it's a truck, that's what goes wrong. People with trucks, a lot of times, take them off-roading, take them down dusty gravel roads, whatever it is, you have it. And the vent tube eventually gets covered in mud and it gets caked up and it plugs. When the vent tube plugs, you build pressure up in the axle and it blows a wheel seal right out. So if you get a vehicle in and it's got a bad wheel seal and the owner says, yeah, I'd just like you to replace the wheel seal. Okay, great. You charge him $100 to do that. He's out the door, he's happy, and he's back in a week because his same wheel seal that you just put in is leaking now. Why is it leaking? Probably because this little vent is plugged up and it built pressure up and it blew the brand new seal out and ruined it in a week. So check these. That's an ASE test question, by the way. If you have a wheel seal that keeps going bad or customer brings in a vehicle with a bad wheel seal, what should you check? They're going to tell you first thing check is the axle vent. Okay. Another example of the vent, sometimes they don't have a vent tube, they just have a little vent sticking out the top. Works okay, except again, they get plugged. So clear them out, get all the dirt, slime, sludge out from around them, make sure they're clean. Don't let those plug up. Another issue that you see a lot, pinion seal leaks. Okay, that pinion, remember pinion's inside of here, pinion gear, and there's your yoke. Okay, as that spins, there's a seal in here that wears out after 30 years and 100,000 miles, whatever it may be, that wears out and it starts seeping gear oil down here. Those need to be replaced. They're a huge pain in the butt. So, word of caution, if you're going to replace one, give yourself a weekend to do it. Don't just think you're going to get it done in an hour, even though it looks simple. Wheel seal. These are the little guys that go bad if your vent tube is plugged. It takes this little lip and it blows right through it, and air pressure blows out there and it ruins that lip, and then it never seals again after that. These are $2 to replace. They're only $2 or $3, maybe $5 at the most. It's not how much they are, it's how hard they are to replace. Not a job you want to do. Again, there's some typical rear axle wheel bearings right there. When those wheel seals go bad, they're going to leak gear oil. And they're going to leak it, guess what, out of here inside of the brakes, and it's going to leak down. You're going to see this type of thing. So if you think your wheel seal might be leaking, take a look. If you see a bunch of gear oil all here around the drum, bottom of the drum, and dripping down on the wheel when the car's parked, probably need a wheel seal. And guess what? If you need a wheel seal, you probably need all new brake parts too, because those have been covered in differential fluid or gear oil now, and it ruins brake shoes. Even if you clean them off with alcohol or acetone, they won't grab again. They're soaked in oil. So plan on doing a brake job also. All right, wheel bearings. These typically don't go bad unless the wheel seal goes bad. If the wheel seal goes bad, moisture gets in here and dust and dirt, and then it grinds these bearings apart, and then you need a new bearing. Okay, there's another type of bearing. That last one you saw was a flat roller bearing. This is a tapered roller bearing. As you can see, it's angled. There's an example of a bad roller wheel right there. There is a moisture damaged tapered roller bearing right there. Probably had a bad wheel seal. Here's a leaking differential cover. Another thing goes bad. Okay, these gaskets go bad and they leak differential fluid. I think that one's pretty cut and dry. Okay. At this point, go ahead and complete your assignment on axles part 1, and have a good day.